To understand better what exactly is happening in the Middle East, we have one of India's top diplomatic voices, somebody who served multiple terms as ambassador in the Middle East. With us here in the studio is Mr. Talmiz Ahmad. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us here in the studio. Let me begin by asking you, the kind of news coming out that we're seeing, the recent killing of Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of the Hezbollah, what really are you expecting, and what exactly should India expect in the context of the Middle East, and how we expect, for instance, the possibility of the violence further escalating, a retaliation perhaps has been speculated about. How do you view the situation developing from here on?
What we are witnessing just now is systematic attempts, I would call them provocations, by Netanyahu to expand the conflict. He is indeed desperate in this regard. If you recall the earlier statements from Hezbollah as well as from the Houthis, their belligerence was entirely connected with Hamas and the Gaza. They had said that we want a ceasefire. Ceasefire, peace process, it means give and take. There is something on the table. Both sides have to accommodate each other, and then you move forward. Biden has spoken about a two-state solution. The Israelis have no interest in any solution. Why did I mention permanent conflict? Because they feel anything that you offer as a solution is not acceptable to us. Hence the need for conflict. So now, if you were sitting in Tel Aviv and you were Netanyahu, you would say that this is a golden opportunity for me. I have no constraints from any source, effectively.
So you're referring to the US elections, essentially?
It's not only the US elections. I would not imagine that any US administration would today effectively be able to restrain Netanyahu. This is hardly the situation when any of them is ever going to propose actually curtailing arms supplies to the Israelis. As you know, whatever is going on now, without American equipment, none of this would have happened.
Right.
The Israelis had finished their stocks long ago. The Americans started supplying weaponry from 8th October and have not missed a day from that day till today. So this is where we are. You have no constraint on Netanyahu. He sees this as a golden opportunity. If you ask me what he desperately wants now, he wants Iran.
Okay.
He wants to do something that will force Iran into the conflict so that he can carry out what Israel had done in 1967 and to preemptively destroy their capacity, military capacity, nuclear capacity, and kill a very large number of people.
Okay.
This is what I feel.
Okay. Do you see this, as important as, for instance, the killing of Osama bin Laden, Ayman al-Zawahiri? Do you see this as something in that context? Because the role that has been played by Hassan Nasrallah, for instance, compelling Israel to withdraw from Lebanon in the wars of 2000-2006, attacks that we have seen where during Hamas, Nasrallah has intensified, pressure on Israel in the north. In that sense, do you see this as a very, very significant and pivotal moment?
It is significant in the sense that taken together, the attacks on the Hezbollah have been quite lethal. Not only are their top leaders killed, large numbers of their rank and file are killed, plus the Israelis have shown very deep and effective technological penetration through the explosions in the, as far as pagers and the walkie-talkies were concerned. But also remember, these are non-state actors. These are militants. They are not conventional forces. These are people who don't have the power of conventional forces, but they have a nuisance value, you could say. They are meant to put pressure on state forces so that you settle, so that you address the issues that are agitating the region. Today, not a single military force all across West Asia can either separately or collectively challenge Israel. The Americans have ensured that. None of them has that capacity, the firepower. Israel has been given the state-of-the-art equipment by the Americans over 40, 50 years. In the meantime, the Iranians, who could potentially have been a threat, have been under sanctions, and they have very primitive military capacity. They have some drones and missiles, etc., and they talk about rockets and whatever, but certainly do not have the military capacity taken as a whole that the Israelis have. So I would say to you that it is a lethal assault, but they will regroup.
Right.
No militant force is ever quiescent. In our own country, we have seen that this Kashmir insurgency is going on for more than 30 years. The insurgency doesn't go away.
Right.
Exactly the same thing will happen with regard to the Hezbollah and Hamas and various other non-state actors who are in the region.
Right. Iran's Foreign Minister Saeed Abbas Araghchi has urged the OIC to hold an emergency meeting in response to the Israeli attacks. And recently, you've written in your column that Israel's escalating attacks on Hezbollah are Netanyahu's pursuit of a final solution in Palestine could be the start of an all-out war. Now, the question is that what happens when the other Arab countries come together, as we are seeing happening even today? There have been statements that have been coming in from the other Arab countries. Do you think that they would be able to build that pressure? Of course, you've mentioned that they don't have the firepower, but all of the countries coming together, don't you think there could be some diplomatic pressure?
At all. What you are seeing is gatherings and conferences. Israel shrugs them off with contempt. You have had UN Security Council resolution that the Americans voted for, calling for immediate ceasefire and a peace process. Then you have had various other ceasefire resolutions coming from the American president in the month of May as well as in the month of August. And what did Netanyahu do? He shrugged it off. These meetings mean nothing effectively. They basically enable statespersons to pretend they are busy doing something useful, but strategically it has no value whatsoever. I think their meetings and all serve no useful purpose. They will simply put together a team, agitate with the Americans, agitate with the Chinese, whatever, but it's not of any value whatsoever.
Okay, but so how do you see this playing out in terms of, you, of course, have mentioned that you would see perhaps a protracted war, a long war. It's already been on for over a year. How do we see things eventually coming to a pass? And what is the role, and particularly as far as India is concerned and Indian interests are concerned in the Middle East, how do you see them being secured in the near future?
I'll talk about India separately, but now with regard to where does it all go? As far as I can see, Netanyahu saw himself in a bind after 7th October because it was alleged, or his people felt, that he had failed the country. Therefore, much of what has been happening is also a matter of his personal and political survival.
Compulsions, yeah.
But what these killings that you are seeing, particularly of high-profile characters, is to remind the Israeli people that he has taken revenge on their behalf. He desperately wants Iran to come in. And if that happens, that it would be the icing on the cake. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the Americans may just about draw a line there, because then you don't know which way things will go. You never know when you have major conflagration. Of course, you had the Six-Day War in 1967, but that was all those 60 years ago, and you can't repeat that, or you can't be sure that it can be repeated. There are also, so far he has acted with impunity. He said, no power can stop me, and certainly the Americans are not going to do anything. The Europeans are completely useless. They can't do anything. The Arabs are even worse. None of them wants to stop me. It's today a situation which one has not seen before. What the Americans had done was something similar. So if I would go back in a historical perspective, when the Americans took revenge for 9/11, they did carpet bombing in Afghanistan, and several 100,000 people were killed. Then they attacked Iraq for no rhyme or reason, and several 100,000 people were killed. After that, when they had to take out the Islamic State, both Mosul and Raqqa were bombed. When they had to remove Gaddafi, Tripoli was bombed, and 80,000 people were killed. So there is a very solid precedent from the Americans themselves. So when any American tells the Israelis to go easy, he reminds them of what they did in Raqqa and in Mosul. He also reminds them of what they did in the Second World War when they bombed cities. So there is a solid historic precedent facing us right in front of our eyes for which when the Americans went to war, there was no restraint.
So now let's come to India's interest in the Middle East. We have large presence of Indians in the Middle East, perhaps not so much in Israel and Palestine specifically. India's interest in terms of oil is there. How do you look at India's interest and how that could be impacted by the events that are currently underway?
In the short term, in the immediate, India's principal interests in the region, principal relationships in the region are with Israel, Saudi Arabia and the UAE. To some extent also with the other GCC countries. These countries, as of now, are not directly affected by the carnage. Therefore, oil supplies, our trade relations, our investments, safety of our community is still where it should be. It's fine. But this is the short term. In the medium term, you get into very uncertain territory. What is likely to happen? It's like this old adage again, can you be safe if your neighbor's house is on fire? You don't know which way it will go. You don't know which way the fire will spread. You don't know which way the wind will turn. And you may find yourself consumed. I feel India's interests in West Asian stability are so fundamental, so crucial, that we cannot afford any hint of instability and violence. Suppose it spins out of control. Suppose Iran gets involved in this scenario. Suppose there is a conflict that consumes the entire Arabian Peninsula and the Gulf. Will not the Indians be directly affected? I would argue to you that if there is a major conflict, several hundred, indeed a few thousand Indians may be killed very quickly. We are all over the place. We are the majority community in at least 3 of the GCC countries. All told, we are 8 million people. So it will be a calamity for India. The energy supplies, the trade, the investment, the welfare of our community. India is the one country in the world that has extraordinary interest in the peace and stability of West Asia. And that is why I have argued for so long and completely in a futile manner, I have argued that India should be an active role player, diplomatic role player in the promotion of peace and security in this region.
Right.
Diplomatic role player.
Yeah. So what role diplomatic? I was just going to come to that. Apart from promoting peace, India is a country which is, now perhaps, in its own light, it's of course a huge country. We see relations across the world with different countries. But in terms of the role that India can play diplomatically, can you get us into the specifics of what you're trying to say?
Absolutely. I've written about it. I believe in an initiative by India, either on its own or in tandem with a few other partners like Indonesia, Malaysia, credible role players in the region, where we undertake a diplomatic initiative to counsel restraint, to come up with ideas relating to ceasefire, to come up with ideas which would comfort Israel in terms of its security and move the peace process forward. It will take time, let me say, but it needs patience, it needs commitment, it needs a long-term vision.
Right. Mr. Talmiz Ahmad, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us here in the studio and sharing with us from your rich and valuable experience as a diplomat and giving us a perspective on the possible roadmap ahead.
Thank you
so
very
much,
much.
sir.